And so we continue. We're going to look at how they came to be defeated. There's not really any way around that. Um, they they were far behind technologically. They really didn't have the concept of land as property. They're lying in the path of a sort of human juggernaut rolling across the plains, and there's not any other way that could have turned out. And there are villains on both sides, mainly ours. Um, so the main factor in the defeat of the Plains Indians was the slaughter, the virtual elimination of the buffalo, which they depended on for their lifestyle. Maybe I better take another sip here. I don't want to get the hiccups in the middle of a video. It's not the middle yet, is it? Okay. As I said, there are maybe 12 to 15 million buffalo roaming the plains in very large numbers. The Indians depended on the buffalo. Now, as I'm going to introduce a word, okay? I'm going to describe the English speaking people moving westward from the United States as Anglos. No time to go into where that came from. It's not an ethnic or racial designation. It's a linguistic and cultural designation. So if the language you learned to speak when you were a baby was English, you're an Anglo. That's more broad than the technical definition. Another word with a similar use is Hispanic. That's not an ethnic designation either. That's a cultural and um, linguistic one. So, but we're not going to use that one, although there were Hispanics involved. Okay. There were two major entities who wanted the buffalo gone. One of those was the U.S. Army, and they understood the importance of the buffalo to the Indians' lifestyle, and they knew that if the buffalo were somehow to be eliminated, the Plains tribes would not be able to continue their lifestyle and would be reduced to a level of dependency upon the U.S. government. Now, take this to heart. Never forget this. Apply this to current political situations. Dependency equals unfreedom. When you're living off the goodness of the United States government, somebody has got you where they want you. You're no longer free. You're no longer dependent. But the Army is not the ones who eliminated the buffalo. It just came in handy. But the other entity was the railroads. Okay, railroading had started in this country around 1830, and after the Civil War, there were efforts ongoing to extend tracks through the plains because everybody else was already tracked up. Um, the way it started, well, there are two things. One, buffalo herds could absolutely play havoc with train schedules. You're driving your train down the track, and there's a big herd of buffalo, and you're not going to move till they do. Okay? Because it can take hours and hours just to go on across. There's no way through them. They won't move. They're like English soccer fans. They just pile up on the cow catcher. Um, so, and I'll tell you this again later, train schedules were the very first human activity in the history of the world that had to be synchronized to the minute over a large area. Train schedules are important. Anyway, railroad companies were building, laying tracks out there. Might have been the first transcontinental railroad or others out there. And you're just out there. How do you feed your construction crews? So, construction companies would employ uh, specialized hunters who worked in crews. You'd have the shooter with a large caliber rifle, sometimes as big as 50 caliber, and it would be so heavy he'd have to use a tripod to steady the thing. Uh, but the buffalo, they're not like jackrabbits that scatter the first time a gun goes pop. Uh, if you get clean kill after clean kill, just punch it right in there behind the shoulder blades and it just flops over. The others won't even notice. If you get a not a clean kill and they're belling around on the ground, the others will probably run off. I think the record, a buffalo hunter shot 119 buffalo in one day from one set of footprints. Okay. Then he is going to have a crew working for him, the skinners. They're going to go out and dress out the buffalo, take the hide off, dress out the meat. Okay. So that's going on. That feeds the train crews pretty well. one of these hunters, or it might have been a skinner, I don't know, had salvaged it. There's all these hides laying around, and just on a hunch, he managed to package one of them up and send it to a tannery in Philadelphia that processed leather goods just to see if it might be useful for anything. And then he got a letter back from the tannery a while later saying that these hides could be converted into very high quality drive belts for industrial uses. Could you please send us 10,000 more? So the slaughter of the buffalo is underway. There was money in it. Even some misguided Indians got in on it. And so the buffalo were reduced from up in the millions to just down in the thousands in less than half a decade. Saw a photograph one time of buffalo bones. It looked like a mountain. There's a man up on top. This pile of bones like 30 feet high. And for the most part, the meat is just left to rot. So, and then after that's run its course, there weren't any more buffalo to shoot. They found uh, uses for the bones, the buffalo bone industry. But the industry is going to play out because it's going to consume the buffalo. They almost went extinct. Now, for the Plains tribes, that means that the buffalo are getting harder and harder and harder to find, and they can't keep living the way they did. So that's going to be difficult for them. Now, there were Indian wars, mainly the 10 or 12 years after the Civil War ended in 1865. Way up in Montana, something called the Powder River War. Up there, the Sioux uh, went on the warpath. And I should back up and tell you something. The Indians west of the Mississippi, there was a time when United States government officials didn't really anticipate people moving out there. I'll tell you this again later, too. The Great Plains used to be referred to on maps labeled as the Great American Desert. That made it a perfect dumping ground for Indians being evicted from the east. Then, in the 1840s, large numbers of people started heading for the Pacific Northwest along the Oregon Trail, so they went in and separated the Indians to create an Indian-free corridor running between. That worked for a while, but up until 1851, they treated Indian tribes as um, dependent nations. And an Indian was a citizen of his tribe, not of the United States. But they dropped the dependent nations thing in 1851. So they're moving toward the reservation system. I'm not back up to where I was quite. But after the Civil War, Indians were generally living on vaguely defined reservations. In the late 1860s, during the 1860s, there were two bloody massacres, one by us, one by them, that forced the government to change its approach. One of them was in the Civil War in northwestern Colorado, a place called Sand Creek. Colorado State militiamen attacked a group of several hundred Indians and just mowed them down, killing men, women, and children. And by the way, in those days, if you're an Indian, Colorado is not the place you want to be because of the attitudes at the play. Some of the men were, you really wants to shoot the little kids, and their commander, Colonel John Shivington, is supposed to have told them, "Nits make lice." Oh boy, that'll play well. So you can read more about that in the supplements. So that people found that repulsive. About the same time, a column of 80 some odd U.S. soldiers was lured into a trap by an Indian chief named Red Cloud, who attacked them and killed them all. This isn't working, guys. We got to come up with something different. So there was a conference between U.S. government representatives and Indian leaders at Fort Laramie, wherever that is, and the Indians agreed to move to reservations. And I was going to bring this up a minute ago. If an Indian chief agrees to a treaty, who is he obligating? Himself. He can't obligate anybody else. Nobody has to do what he says. What he's obligating himself to do is go back and persuade the others to go along with this. And generally they would at first. They wouldn't have complete success. Some Indians just shrugged it off. They didn't have to go, so they didn't. Anyway, back up to where I left off. The Sioux have a reservation up in Montana, Dakota, somewhere up there. And there was the Powder River War, which ended with the Sioux accepting a reservation. And then some years later, in 1875, I think it was, a troop of cavalrymen led by none other than Custer, George Custer, discovered gold in a stream bed in Montana. And they reported that, and prospectors flocked to the area. It didn't matter to them whether the Indians had a reservation or not. They probably would have, their minds were clear. They didn't see how Indians could possibly claim ownership of something that valuable. So the Sioux rose up to defend what they thought had been given to them, and the Army decided, okay, we're going to finish this. So they got out their maps and laid out a campaign where three different um, large bodies of troops would converge in one spot from three different directions. The one that got there first was the 7th Cavalry Unit, commanded by George Custer. Now, Custer was very politically ambitious. By the way, don't think of Custer as a hero. George Custer was a skank. George Custer was in the West Point Military Academy when the Civil War started. They let him out of the brig and graduated his class a year early so he could go fight the rebels. War was his natural element. He displayed a genius for getting to exactly the right spot at exactly the right time and advanced quickly. If you know your military ranks, prepare to gasp. George Custer was advanced in rank in one step from first lieutenant to brigadier general when he was 23 years old. When General Grant accepted Lee's surrender to end the Civil War, there were 10 officers in the room with him, and Custer was one of them. He's in and out of trouble. Didn't get along with the Indians. The Indians had a name for him, which translates into English as the Son of the Morning Star. Sounds messianic. It isn't. It referenced his preferred tactic of attacking sleeping Indian villages just before dawn when everybody, even the dogs, are asleep, and just kill everything that moves. So we have plenty of real heroes without putting George Custer on a pedestal. All right. He's politically ambitious, and he attacked rashly with only about a third of his men. He had 250 some odd men out of over 700 with him at the time. He split his column into three parts, and they attacked what they took to be an isolated village of Sioux Indians. This was in broad daylight. Then he found out too late that what he had attacked was what he could see of the annual national convention of the Sioux tribe. There's between 2,000 and 3,000 Indians out there, and they could put over 1,000 armed braves out there in a matter of minutes. So in a battle that probably took less than half an hour, Custer and all his men, except maybe one, there might have been one that actually got away, were overcome and killed and mutilated. So what's Custer thinking? What he's thinking, we guess, is that this is the summer, it's a presidential election year, 1876. Convention's about to take place. If he can get in the newspapers with a splashy victory he can claim sole credit for, he might even score a vice presidential nominee. Well, he did get in the papers, not like he thought. Okay. That was the Indians' only major victory. They couldn't keep that many people together for more than a few days. They scattered back out, and within a year, they've been crushed. 1877 saw what to me is a particularly tragic incident that makes no sense. There was a tribe, I'm guessing at the pronunciation, Nez Perce, French name, probably wasn't their original one. They're up in Washington somewhere, and they decided, heck with this. They set out for the Canadian border, and somehow the U.S. Army thought they had to stop them. So, bye guys, have a nice day. Hope you enjoy Canada. Why not? So they were attacked almost continuously, led by someone named as Chief Joseph. They fended off the army for 77 days and made it to within 30 miles of the Canadian border before they're brought to ground. Chief Joseph, who may have been reading Shakespeare, is supposed to have said, "From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." Well, and the Indian Wars are over. Okay. After that, it quiets down quite a bit. The last quote, battle unquote, of the Indian Wars. Let me see how close I am to running out of time. I'm real close, so I'm going to come back to that in a minute.